Lujain al-Hathrul, for example, a young women's rights activist who was jailed in 2014 for trying to drive her car in Saudi Arabia. Upon her release from prison, she went to live in the UAE, where last March she was grabbed on the side of the freeway, put in cuffs, thrown on a private jet and taken back to Saudi Arabia against her will. Today, aged just 29 years old, she sits behind bars for the temerity of asking for women to have the right to drive. Lujain, according to her sister, as we speak tonight, is being held in solitary confinement, where she's been beaten, waterboarded, electrocuted, sexually harassed and threatened with rape and murder. The blogger Raif Badawi had his 35th birthday last month behind bars. He hasn't seen his kids for 7 years. He was sentenced for the crime of apostasy to 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes. His wife says his health has deteriorated in prison and he won't survive another round of flogging. We've done nothing to help the other 1.8 million severely malnourished children in Yemen who are suffering from a famine and a cholera crisis caused by a Saudi-imposed blockade. And then there's Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal, who was sitting with me in the green room in Al Jazeera English last March as we joked about his security while the Crown Prince was in town in DC. Less than 7 months later, he was dead. Brutally murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, his body allegedly cut to pieces with a bone saw on the direct orders of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Tonight, it's time we make clear that the West needs to cut its ties with Saudi Arabia. What about the cost of cutting ties with Saudi Arabia, they'll say? What about the fact that our economies need Saudi Arabia? Which isn't a fact, by the way, it's complete hyperbole. In 2017, US exports to Saudi Arabia accounted for a whopping 1.1% of US exports. What about the oil, they say? Well, the United States is now the world's biggest producer of oil. In fact, the US has produced more oil than Saudi Arabia for 4 straight years in a row. President Trump said last November that we can't abandon the Saudis because, and I quote, they're leading the fight against radical Islamic terrorism. What? Are you kidding me? We're supposed to thank them for trying to sort out the terrorism problem that they helped start? What about Iran? They say we need Saudi Arabia against Iran, even though the last time I checked, there were 15 Saudis on those planes, not 15 Iranians. But even if you're worried about the threat posed by Iran, note how every step that the Saudis have taken in recent years has helped and empowered Iran. They bombed Yemen and pushed the Houthi rebels closer into the arms of Iran. They blockaded Qatar and pushed Qatar and Iran together.
Now, Mehdi Hassan, in an article for The Intercept, headlined, "The reverse Midas touch of Saudi Arabia's crown prince is turning the Middle East to dust." You've presented a completely different perspective on the kingdom. So could you respond to Friedman's piece, and then also the fact that as Trump vocally criticizes practically everything to do with Islam, he chose to make his first state visit to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah. Well, let's just deal with Friedman first, a nauseating piece, as I think a lot of people have pointed out in recent days. As for this nonsense about, returning Saudi Arabia to moderate Islam, Saudi Arabia has never been the home of moderate Islam. This idea that MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is pushing, and that journalists like Tom Friedman in the West credulously just repeat and regurgitate, that pre-1979 Saudi Arabia was some kind of moderate bastion of liberalism and pluralism, a multi-faith utopia, is absurd. There was, as long as the Saud family have been in charge of that country and imposing their brand of very intolerant, very reactionary Salafi Islam, it's not been moderate in any shape or form. The Saudi Arabians have been exporting their particularly puritanical, intolerant brand of Islam to the rest of the Muslim majority world since the 1950s, 60s and 70s.